Hello, this is Peter Coughlin, and I am recording for the GE 4016 class, and for anybody else, I guess, who wants to watch on YouTube, a review of the third module quiz in our course, which is on the module on internal analysis. And what I'm going to do is go over some general results, then specific questions. This is actually one of the rare cases where I actually think this, given the nature of the questions that people struggled with, and the fact that they actually struggled with more questions than usual, even though the average grade wasn't lower, and some more fundamental questions. I created a number of original slides for this presentation, which is not something I usually do. And so I'm hoping this is of benefit to students beyond the usual sort of review of a module quiz. Again, caveats, I'm recording this, I'm recording this out of my home office, so if you hear a dog barking or children talking in the background or whatever, please understand. Hopefully the audio is good and the recording works as well. All right, so overall, what about the overall score? So, as usual, there were a number of students who scored a perfect score, 100. The minimum was 40, and the average was 83.2. So a pretty big range on this one. And as I said, I've sort of liberalized the way I'm approaching the grading and willing to give the top half of the class A's. What that ultimately means then is that it translates to roughly, if this was the only grade in the course, if you got an 81 or above, you were in the top half. And so the range for an A- would be 67 to 81, and from 40 to 67, that would be, the lower range that I would assign a B+. Again, keep in mind, that is assuming this was the only grade component. Obviously, your ultimate letter grade for the course is a combination of things. Now, that wouldn't have, just looking at this data here, I wouldn't have said, oh, this is unusual. What was a bit unusual was this. So it was about the individual questions. Now, first let me step back and give you some information about the content of this quiz. So the module quiz contained 25 questions. There were 19 true-false questions, 5 multiple-choice questions, 1 matching question. They were broken up into 5 topic areas. Competitive advantage, 5 questions. Added value was 5 questions. Positioning, 4 questions on that. Activities and activity systems, 4 questions on that. Good strategy, bad strategy, 2 questions on that. And finally, trade-offs, 5 questions. Keep in mind there were 3 class days in this module. Most other modules, or all other modules, only had 2 class days. We had 3 class days, so you could certainly, there was arguably more material to cover. The 25 questions, I actually extended the time limit, I believe, to 90 minutes instead of 60. So it certainly shouldn't have been particularly more challenging, I don't think. And based on the averages, it wouldn't jump out to me as saying it was a particularly challenging quiz. But what I found was interesting was that as I've sort of done, with this class, I have been reviewing any question on any of these module quizzes for which, at least 1 out of 5 students answered incorrectly. I usually set the bar about 70%, but you guys have done so well that, if I set the bar at 70%, right, in other words, so at least 30% of the class, did get the question wrong and therefore would be interested in me going over the details of it. I used to set the bar at 30%. The reason I set it at 20% was frankly because there weren't that many questions that 30% of you got wrong. The scores were very high. And that's probably true in this, but since I've set the bar at 20%, in other words, if the average score was less than 80% on a question, or in other words, if it's a all or nothing question, meaning that fewer than 80% answered it incorrectly, fewer than 80% answered it correctly, then I review it in these, lectures or presentations that I post, that I record, that I create, that I record, then I post on YouTube and then give you a link. Now, but it was interesting was that I don't think I've gone over more than maybe 5 questions in previous module quizzes, and looking at the data from the final module quiz, I don't think that's going to be the case either. But this one, there actually were 10 of the 25 questions, so, a fair number of questions that at least 20% of students answered incorrectly or received only partial credit. So I'm going to go over those 10 challenging questions. So not only is there greater content in this, because there's more questions I'm going to go over than I would in a typical review of a module quiz, you'll see that some of the questions are pretty fundamental. To the point where typically what I will do is I will say, here was the question, and show you the slide that gave you the answer from what we did in class. Well, in this case, I am going to do that, and I'll quote the readings where the answers are, but they're actually, I sort of thought, it's interesting that students are getting that question wrong. And they've actually created some new material, right? Again, presents the same ideas. Not to say that you shouldn't have been able to easily get the answers or not without too much difficulty get the answers from the slides and the materials presented. You'll see that. But I've actually, in addition to showing where we went over it during class, I'm actually have added some content. So in that sense, I'm thankful because this has allowed me to understand where I need to add more clarity, and so I've created some slides that now I will in the future include during the regular classes on these topics. So remember, there were 6 different categories that I broke this section. There are 6 sections in the quiz, and so you'll see that there were challenging or people struggle on questions in each section, except for the good strategy, bad strategy. There's only 2 questions in there, and you guys pretty much nailed those, right? And it's also interesting, of course, that it seemed to be the earlier part of the quiz was more challenging than the later part. So let me go through this piece by piece. So first, the competitive advantage. So we had 2 questions in there, questions 1, 2, and 4, on the topic of competitive advantage. So question 1, in the section on competitive advantage, which was challenging. A lot of the questions, as you'll note from the summary before, a lot of true-false questions on this. Right? In fact, I'm thinking now, maybe all of the 10 questions I'm about to go over might all be true or false questions. I could be wrong, but I think that might be the case. And not surprising, that was 19 out of the 25 questions were of that nature, and I've received feedback from students that these are true or false are particularly challenging for whatever reason that might be. So here's the first one. True or false? A firm which achieves a lower cost than all of its rivals will have a low cost advantage. Again, a firm which achieves a lower cost than all of its rivals will have a low cost advantage. True or false? Well, as is typical, there are certain words that are particularly important to emphasize. And here the word is probably advantage. We're talking, what does it mean to have a low cost advantage? Well, rather than answer this question or explore the answer to this question, let me actually talk about question 2 because it was very similar, and we'll be able to come to the answer to both of them the same way. So here's one that says, a firm which achieves a higher customer willingness to pay than all of its rivals will have a competitive advantage via differentiation. So question 1 is about having lower cost and therefore a low cost advantage. Question 2 is about having higher willingness to pay and therefore differentiation advantage. Again, the key is, what does it mean to have a advantage? In particular, for question 1, a low cost advantage. Question 2, a differentiation advantage. Well, let's go back to what we talked about on that. So this was actually the slide that we presented on types of competitive advantage, the first slide, on the 2 most common types of competitive advantage, which were the low cost advantage and differentiation advantage, which questions 1 and 2 ask about. So first example here, we said, look, suppose there are 2 firms competing, firm A and firm B. Right? And firm A delivers a product for which customers have a willingness to pay of 8 and for which they incur a cost of 2. Firm B delivers a competing product, for which consumers have a willingness to pay of 6 and they incur a cost of 1. So customers are deciding between whether buying firm A or firm B, and these are the willingness to pays that they can achieve, how much the customer's willing to pay for each product, and of course the cost they incur for each firm incurs to deliver that. Now, we say that firm A is differentiated. To be differentiated means to deliver a higher willingness to pay. So if customers are willing to pay more for your product than the alternative, you are differentiated. Right? And so firm A is in fact differentiated. They have a higher willingness to pay than in this case, only other rival, which is firm B. And by the way, if it helps, you could think about, instead of just 2 firms, A and B, think of firm A, and B represents the average competitor. Right? And so firm A is differentiated relative to the average competitor. But, I think if, it helps to even make it simpler, I think. Suppose there's only 2 firms competing in this segment, at least, of the market. Now, we then pointed out, of course, the value created, meaning the total value that's going to be available, in this case, to the customer and the firm. Right? The total value that is created by that transaction. Anytime somebody buys from firm A, how much value is created? Every time somebody buys from firm B, how much value is created? Well, the answer is 6 for firm A and 5 for firm B. Because again, the willingness to pay is 8. Firm A, cost of 2. The difference is 6. Here, the difference, 6 minus 1. The difference for firm B is 5. And price will fall somewhere between willingness to pay and cost. right? And the customer will capture value when it's pay minus price. Oops. And the firm will capture, of course, price minus cost. That's the margin. And so price minus cost plus when it's pay minus price is the total value created. So when it's pay minus cost is the total value created by any transaction. So the total value created by any transaction in which firm A is involved is 6, and for firm B is 5. And that is why, again, remember, we say not only is firm A differentiated, firm A has a differentiation advantage. Why? Because of the gap between one's pay and cost is greater than that of its rival. Firm A does not have a differentiation advantage because it is differentiated. That is only part of the conditions necessary. You have to have a differentiation advantage. You have to have a higher ones to pay than your rivals, or at least the average of your rivals, right? But certainly higher ones to pay, and have a higher, more value created, greater gap between one's pay and cost. So we say that firm A is a differentiation advantage. Now, over here on the right, we introduce this idea of the low-cost advantage, the other of the two most common types of advantage we have, the low-cost advantage. So now suppose we're in a different world here, but it's firm C competing against firm D. So this is not the same world necessarily, but certainly could be. We could talk about that. But we have firm C competing against firm D. Okay, firm C provides a product that generates a bonus pay of 8 at a cost of 2. Firm D provides a product that generates a bonus pay of 9 at a cost of 4, right? And so therefore, we say that firm C has a low-cost position relative to firm D. Right? And firm D could be the only other competitor. That's a simpler way to think of it. Or think about the average industry competitor, right? But the bottom line is firm C has a low-cost position because it has a lower cost than all the alternatives, or the average of all alternatives, right? Than firm D here. And we again let's look at the value created by each transaction. Every time that somebody buys from firm C, right, the total value created is 6. One is pay minus cost, right? Some of that's going to go to the customer. Some of it's going to go to the firm. It depends on where the price is, of course. That's going to determine how much goes to the firm versus going to the customer. But the total value created is 6. And the total value created for every transaction firm D is involved in is 5. Because the value created is greater for firm C than firm D, we can say that firm C has a low-cost advantage. Right? So again, to have a low-cost advantage, just like with differentiation advantage, is a two-step process. You have to have lower cost than your rivals and have a greater gap between one's pay and cost. Having a lower cost alone does not mean you have a low-cost advantage. In particular, let's look at the world here on the left, firm A versus firm B. Firm B has the lowest cost. If it's just firm A and firm B has the lowest cost. But we do not say firm B has a low cost advantage. They do not have an advantage. Having the lowest cost does not yield an advantage unless you do so while also having the greatest gap between one's to pay and cost. Right? It's the gap between one's pay and cost that drives advantage, not having lower cost, not having higher one's to pay. What's really requirement for advantage is having the higher gap between one's pay and cost. So here on the left side of the screen here, of course, what we're saying is that firm A has a differentiation advantage. Firm A has a differentiated position. They have a higher one's pay than their rival, and they have a differentiation advantage because their gap between one's pay and cost is greater than the rival. Firm B has a low cost position, but it is not an advantageous position. It does not yield them an advantage because, yes, they have the lowest cost, but they do so right, with a bonus pay that is even lower. Right? Here, firm B's cost is $1, if you will, below firm A's cost, but the bonus pay is 2. And so firm B has the lowest cost but has no advantage. Similarly, let's go to the world here on the right with firm C and firm D. We said firm C has the low cost advantage because firm C has a low cost position, lower cost than all of its rivals, and a low cost. It has an advantage because the gap between one's pay and cost is greater than that of its rivals. Meanwhile, what about firm D? Well, firm D does have the highest ones to pay, right? Even if they're competing with these guys over here on the left, but just focusing on firm C and D. Firm D generates a greater one's pay than firm C. Therefore, firm D has a differentiated position. They generate the highest one's pay, but they do not have a differentiation advantage because even though their one's pay is $1 higher than firm C, their cost is $2 higher. So their gap, the value created, is smaller. So again, to have a differentiated advantage, you have to have a higher one's pay than your rivals and a higher gap between one's pay and cost. To have a low cost advantage, you have to have a lower cost than your rivals and a greater gap between one's pay and cost. So let's go back to question 1. True or false, a firm which achieves a lower cost than all of its rivals will have a low cost advantage. Well, we know that is not true, right? You will have a low cost position maybe, right? But you can have the lowest cost of everybody and have a terrible position potentially, right? You could in fact have willingness to pay below your cost. We gave some examples of that. The bottom line is advantage derives not from having the lowest cost, but from having the greatest gap to your willingness to pay and cost. And so a firm which achieves a lower cost than all its rivals could have a low cost advantage, but we cannot say it will have a low cost advantage. In fact, going back to our diagram here, right? Firm B here achieved a lower cost than its rival, than all of its rivals, because there's only one other rival here, right? But it does not have a low cost advantage. So this statement is false. A firm which achieves a lower cost than all of its rivals will have a low cost advantage. No, will have a low cost position, and that may or may not give it an advantage. Right? You could have the lowest cost and have no advantage, or you could have the lower cost and have advantage. Advantage depends on the gap between willingness to pay and cost. Similarly, question 2. Right? True or false, a firm which achieves a higher customer willingness to pay than all of its rivals will have a competitive advantage via differentiation. So is it sufficient? If you have a higher customer willingness to pay, that you will have an advantage via differentiation. No, you will have a differentiated position because you are the most differentiated player. You have the highest willingness to pay. Maybe you are selling, as I gave the example, of bottled waters with bottles made out of gold. That will generate the highest willingness to pay, but at a cost that nobody's done that because it doesn't make sense. Right? The cost disadvantage outweighs the willingness to pay advantage. Right? And so ultimately, what generates a differentiating advantage is having not only a higher customer willingness to pay, but also having a higher gap between willingness to pay and cost. So that statement is also false. So question 1 and 2, again, highlight the point that it's not sufficient to have lower costing rivals or to have higher differentiation, higher willingness to pay than all your rivals. You have to also, to have advantage, you have to also have a greater gap between willingness to pay and cost. Now question 4, builds on this, and it says the following. It says, true or false, a firm cannot have a competitive advantage unless it generates a willingness to pay which is higher than the willingness to pay of all rivals, and or incurs a cost to produce or serve that is lower than the cost of all rivals. Right? So, stepping back, questions 1 and 2 confirmed for us. It is not sufficient. Having a lower cost is not sufficient to give you an advantage, because you have to also have a greater gap between willingness to pay and cost. So having lower cost is not sufficient to have an advantage. That was question 1. Question 2 showed us, after we saw the answer, that having the highest willingness to pay is also not sufficient to have an advantage. Neither of those two things alone will guarantee you an advantage. This is saying, okay, but you got to have at least one of them, right? This is saying, look, you can't have an advantage. Maybe it's not sufficient, to have, one or two, but you've got to at least, one of these has to at least be true, otherwise there's no way to have an advantage, right? You have to at least generate a willingness to pay which is higher than the willingness to pay of all rivals, and, or you've got to incur costs to produce a service that's lower than the cost of all rivals. We at this point in our analysis, because and you've also got to have the higher gap to willingness to pay and cost, but it must be the case that one of these has to be true. You have to be differentiated or low cost, right? At a minimum. Let's see if that's in fact true. Well, after we gave that previous slide on the types of competitive advantage, we gave the low cost and we gave the differentiated advantage, or differentiated low cost, to actually say it in order they were presented. I then gave this slide. I talked about the dual advantage, like the Holy Grail, having both higher willingness to pay and cost. Higher willingness to pay and lower cost than any of your rivals. But then what's of interest, and I emphasize this idea of the mixed advantage. Here's the firm G, competing against firm H and firm I, where it has a higher willingness to pay than firm I, but not firm H, has a lower cost than firm H, but not firm I. Right? Firm G does not have a higher willingness to pay or generate higher willingness to pay than its rivals. It does not have a lower cost than all its rivals. Firm G does not have a differentiated position relative to these two rivals or a low cost position. Right? But notice the gap between willingness to pay and cost is the greatest, and it creates 6 with each transaction, whereas firm H and firm I only create value of 5. And so we said firm G does have an advantage. Why? It's not differentiated, it's not low cost, but it creates more value with each transaction than any other alternative. The gap between willingness to pay and cost is greater. We actually went in here, so we talked about to illustrate that, what about value capture? So we said, what if firm G, H, and I are all competing for the same customer or same group of customers, right? What's going to happen? Well, they're each going to try to offer a better deal, and the customer is going to buy based on what the greatest value capture the customer can get, which is going to be willingness to pay minus price. And we said in competition, look, what they end up is each lowering their price to try to steal the customer and get the customer and give a better deal to the customer. But they get to the point where firm H can't price any lower than cost, profitably. Firm I can't price any lower than cost. They get down there, right? And firm G can offer customers, either at a price of $3 or maybe $2.99, could offer customers as good a deal or better than firm H or firm I can offer customers, and still have some margin, price minus cost, left over, right? And this is the idea that, look, value capture under competition, firm G will capture value, but neither firm H nor firm I will. Only the firm that has the firm with the greatest value created is the one that's going to capture value. Those who create less value than than the alternatives will not end up capturing any value. Right? So here we have firm H. Look, they have the highest willingness to pay, but they have no advantage. Right? Firm H is differentiated, but does not have a differentiation advantage. Differentiated position, not a differentiation advantage. Highest willingness to pay, but no advantage. And similarly, firm I, low cost position, lower cost than all of its rivals, but no low cost advantage because it does so without having the greatest gap between willingness to pay and cost. Right? The advantage goes not to the firm with the highest willingness to pay, not to the firm with the lowest cost, but the firm that generates the greatest gap between willingness to pay and cost, which in this case is firm G. Right? So firm G does not have a higher willingness to pay than all its rivals. Firm G does not have a lower cost than all its rivals. Yet firm G has a competitive advantage because its gap between willingness to pay and cost is greater than all of its rivals. Right? So the lesson being, look, firm G has an advantage. But it does not have the higher willingness to pay than all its rivals. Does not have a lower cost. So you do not necessarily need to have a higher willingness to pay than all your rivals. You do not necessarily need to have a lower cost than all your rivals. What matters is that you have the greatest gap between willingness to pay and cost. That is what generates advantage. So going back to this question, true or false, a firm cannot have a competitive advantage unless it, one, generates a willingness to pay which is higher than the willingness to pay of all rivals. Well, no. Firm G, we said a competitive advantage, it did not generate a willingness to pay which is higher than the willingness to pay of all rivals. Or two, encourage a cost to produce or serve that's lower than the cost of all rivals. No. Firm G has a competitive advantage, but does not have a cost to produce or serve that's lower than the cost of all rivals. So is it necessary that at least one of those conditions be true to have a competitive advantage? The answer is no, it's false. Right? Because we just gave the example with the mixed advantage. Firm G has a competitive advantage without having either of those be true. Right? Does not have the highest willingness to pay, does not have the lowest cost, but has the greatest gap between willingness to pay and cost. All right, so those are the three questions that really gets the heart of what competitive advantage is all about, which is about creating a greater gap between willingness to pay and cost than any of the alternatives. Okay? And it leads nicely into added value, the next section. And so there are two questions that were challenging in added value, question 3 and 4. Question 3, again, true or false. In theory, at least, a firm should always capture no more and no less than its added value. Okay, true or false. So in other words, again, what does it mean? If you capture no more and you capture no less, you capture exactly, right? I'm going to spend no more or no less than $100 on this lawnmower. That means you're going to spend exactly $100, right? So is it true that a firm should always capture exactly its added value? No more, no less. True or false? All right. Well, let's go directly to the slides. Let's first of all separate it, right? Well, to make it simple, we're really saying I'll rewrite the question this way. In theory, at least, a firm should always capture 1, no more than its added value, and 2, no less than its added value. So in order for this statement to be true, both of those claims have to be true. If either one of them is false, or both, right, then the statement as a whole is false. So what's added value? Remember, added value is the total value created with the organization and the environment minus the total value created without the organization and the environment. Or alternatively, the value that would be lost to the world if the organization disappeared. Now, in the examples we showed, like the ones before, we showed a series of examples, and all of them, the value captured was in fact exactly equal to added value. Right? And so I asked, is this a general rule or result? And again, this slide is exactly the slide was presented in class, as was the previous one. Right? Is this a general rule? In other words, is it generally true that the value captured will exactly equal your added value? The answer is no. Instead, the general rule is this: the value captured will be less than or equal to your added value. You cannot capture more than your added value, but you could capture less. To understand this, I then went through a few questions. So the first question is, why can't a firm expect to capture more than its added value? Why can't you do that? And I gave an example, and I went through an extended example. I'm not going to do that now. right? But the logic was this: look, if you try to capture more than your added value, the other place could exclude you, make a separate deal on their own, and all end up better off. Okay, well, think about that. Like that's the idea. Think about the idea that that there's a group of people, of businesses, whatever, but there's a group, and they're doing their thing, and they're each say making $1 profit every day. And you come along and you say, hey, I got something better. There's two of them and they're each making $1 profit. And you come along and say, you know what? I got something where, I can make sure that, if you deal with me, we can, actually have more value to go around. Instead of only having $2 a share, we can have $3 a share. So you're expanding the pie by $1. Well, if you try to capture more than the dollar by which you expand the pie, you say, wait a minute, then we were better off without you. We were each making $1 without you. If you're trying to come in here, you make a bigger pie, but you're trying to capture so much of it, you're leaving us with less than we had before. We can exclude you and make a separate deal on our own. That's the idea. You cannot capture more than you bring to the table, because then they could say, wait a minute, we don't need you. We can do better without you. So in other words, by definition, if you get more than your added value, they could capture more without you. Right? So you can't. Right? You could try to fool the people for a little while, but eventually, certainly, the idea is that again that if you try to capture more than your added value, right? Competition, others will price and demand prices, etc., such that you either have to change or reduce the value you're capturing, or you'll get be excluded altogether. By implication, of course, that means if you don't have added value, you can expect to capture no value. That's why all the firms in our examples, the ones that were disadvantaged and had no added value, they didn't end up capturing any value. Right? They might stay in business, right? Because when we say capture no value, they might continue to stay in business because they're making a 5% return, and that's what the best they could do with anything else. So they're not going to get out of the business necessarily, because what would they do? They put the money in an index fund and get the same amount. To not capture value in an economic sense means that you can't do, you're capturing what you could, the best, you're not doing any better than you could do from your next best alternative. But if you're actually capturing value, it means that you are generating a greater return than you could from your next best alternative. So what we just said was, look, so true or false, in theory at least, a firm should always capture no more than its added value. That first part we've confirmed is true. You should not be able to capture more than your added value, otherwise they'd exclude you and make a deal on their own. So you can't capture more than your added value. What about this? Should it be the case that you could never capture less than your added value? Or you should never capture less than your added value? Right? Well, we've already seen the answer, which is that no, you might capture less than your added value. But why is that? Well, so that's when we asked the second question. I said, why should a firm or organization expect to sometimes capture less than its added value? Right? And I again gave an example. In this case, I will go through the example. I didn't before, but let me go through the example here. So I had initially, one of the examples we had in class was this one. It was scenario 3 from the initial simple example. Suppose you have one firm and one customer. Right? That's it. Only one firm, one customer. If the customer disappears, nobody to sell to. If the firm disappears, nobody to buy from. Right? What is the price going to be when these two are trying to negotiate, and the firm can produce at a cost of 10 and the customer is willing to pay 20? Right? Well, the answer is we don't really have anything to say about that, right? It could be equally split. It could be 15. It could depend on a lot of things. But the bottom line, what we can certainly say at the very least is it's somewhere between 10 and 20. Right? The customer's not going to pay more than 20. This firm is not going to sell below 10. So at the very least, the price is somewhere between 10 and 20. Now, to go back to this definition of added value, what is each player's added value? Well, the total value created with the firm and the customer in the environment is 10, right? But the price is 5, then they each capture 5. If the price is 2, the firm captures 2, the customer captures 8. But whatever the price is, the total value captured between the firm and the customer is going to be 10. Okay? So the firm value capture plus the customer value capture is 10. Right? And this is true no matter the price of the trade. Okay, so total value created with both the firm and the customer is 10. Now remember, added value is the value created with you in the environment minus the value created without you. So what is the total value created without the firm? Well, the answer is 0. The firm doesn't exist. The customer is willing to pay 20 for something that nobody can produce. It doesn't exist. I'm willing to pay a lot for certain inventions that don't exist. Right? And so that doesn't do anything until somebody's able to provide it. So without the firm, the total value created is 0. So therefore, the added value of the firm is 10. The value created with the firm is 10. Without the firm, it's 0. So the added value of the firm is 10. What are the total value created without the customer? Well, because you take the customer away, we also get no transaction. So the total value created goes down to 0. So with the customer, the total value created in the world is 10. Without the customer, it's 0. So the added value of the customer is 10. So both the firm and the customer have added value of 10. Right? But wait a minute. The combined firm value capture plus customer value capture has to be 10. So therefore, they cannot each capture 10, because 10 plus 10 is 20, but the combined value capture has to be 10. So one or both players must capture less than its added value. Right? And so, in other words, what we're saying is, why should a firm or organization expect to sometimes capture less than its added value? Because your value capture also depends on the added value of buyers, suppliers, and complementers. Right? And that's why your added value is going to be less than or equal. I'm sorry, your value capture is less than or equal to your added value. In particular, we then said, okay, well, then what does added value, how does it really determine price and cost outcomes? Well, it constrains price and cost by limiting the value each player can capture, right? Because price and cost will dictate how much, a combination of one's pay, price, cost, and supply opportunity cost will dictate how much each player captures. So I think it's easier to present it, and again, these are all slides already presented. Remember this diagram, right? We have the customer is willing to pay, if a supplier has a certain supplier opportunity cost, right? The value captured by the customer is willingness to pay minus price. The value captured by the firm is price minus cost, and the value captured by suppliers is cost minus supplier opportunity cost. Okay. Well, what this says is that, look, if the customer cannot capture any more, then nobody can capture more than their added value. And this difference is what the customer captures. So this difference cannot be greater than the customer's added value. It's got to be less than or equal to the customer's added value. And the value captured by the firm, that's got to be less than or equal to the firm's added value. So this difference, price minus cost, has to be less than the firm's added value. And finally, the value captured by the suppliers cannot be greater than the supplier's added value. So this difference, cost minus supply opportunity cost, has to be less than or equal to the supplier added value. Right? So that's what added value. Added value makes sure that you cannot capture. Added value is an upper bound of what you can capture. So going back to our question, right? True or false? In theory, at least, a firm should always capture no more than its added value and no less than its added value. Well, it should capture no more, but no, it will often and can, in many cases, generally will capture less than its added value. Added value is an upper bound. And so the first part is true, the second part is false, which means the overall statement is false. The next question in the added value section, question 4, was this: as long as a firm has a positive added value, it has a competitive advantage relative to its rival. Right? So it's saying having added value means you will have a competitive advantage. Remember before we had all these things about saying, is this sufficient? Is it sufficient to have a competitive advantage if you have a lower cost? Or is it sufficient to have a competitive advantage if you have a higher one to pay? Well, now we're saying, is it sufficient to have a competitive advantage if you have actually have added value? Is that a sufficient condition? Right? Well, this is a slide I presented. I said actually quotes on this exact topic from the reading on creating competitive advantage. And here are some of the quotes. To have added value, a firm must drive a wedge between customer willingness to pay and supply opportunity cost. Indeed, it must have create a wider wedge than a rival achieve. Right? A firm with a wider wedge has a competitive advantage. A firm with a competitive advantage has added value. Okay, that's maybe the most important bullet for this question. A firm with a wider wedge, right? In other words, has a competitive advantage. Well, the wider wedge means you have added value. So in other words, a firm with added value has a competitive advantage. And a firm with a competitive advantage has added value. In other words, A equals B, B equals A. And added value is competitive advantage. And competitive advantage is added value. Competitive advantage derives fundamentally from scarcity. A firm establishes added value by making sure that it is unique in some valuable way. The network of suppliers, customers, and complementers within which it operates is more productive with it than without it, and that it is not readily replaced. And the punchline was, look, it's value and scarcity. You got to do something that's valuable, and actually, you got to do something that's valuable and be one of the few that do something that's valuable. So you got to be scarce. That's what gives you added value. And added value equals. The equal sign is the key here. Added value equals competitive advantage. Right? So going back to our question, as long as a firm has positive added value, has competitive advantage relative to its rivals, yes. That's what it means. Added value is just a way of quantifying, as the presentation actually was titled, quantifying advantage. Right? Added value is a synonym. To have added value is to have competitive advantage. To have competitive advantage is to have added value. So this statement is true. All right. So that covers the first two sections on competitive advantage, added value. Now we go on to positioning. And you'll notice here I flipped them. I'm actually going to go over question 4 in positioning before question 3. Let's talk about the questions, but there were these two questions in the positioning section. So first, question 4. True or false? A variety-based positioning is one in which a firm offers a broader variety of product or service than its rivals. True or false? Again, a variety-based positioning is one in which a firm offers a broader variety of products or services than rivals. So what does it mean to have a variety-based positioning? Does it mean that you offer a broader variety? That's the key. Is a variety-based positioning one that involves offering a broader variety of products or services than its rivals? So this is really, again, a question of, we have our what, where, and how strategy, advantage, scope, and activity. This is really about the scope question. A variety-based positioning is one basis, one scope, one sort of your variety. We're talking about variety, needs, but it's about the where question. What's the domain? In what environment, space, domain do you seek to, or in fact, achieve an advantage? And we said, look, variety is about what product or services does the organization provide. Your needs basis of your positioning is about what set of customers you serve, and the access basis of the positioning is in what locations and via what channels does the organization serve its customers. And remember this diagram here, we talked about variety-based positioning, and it is determined by which product or services you offer. A access-based positioning is one that's driven by which channels or locations you serve, and a needs-based positioning is one that's driven by which customers or users you serve. Right? But in each case, right, a variety-based positioning is about saying we're going to do this and this and this, but not this and this. Right? And an access-based positioning is about saying, we're going to focus on these channels, right, but not these other ones. Right? We'll serve whatever. Let me go back for a second. Okay? A variety-based positioning is saying, look, we are going to offer this product, but not these other ones. We will do that with whatever channels make sense, whatever locations make sense. We will do it. We will serve whatever customers or users are the ones who are going to want that product. But the basis of our positioning is saying we are only going to offer these products and not these other ones. Right? That may end up limiting the customers we serve. It may end up limiting the channels we use. But the basis of our positioning is about choosing a limited set of product or services. And similarly with channels or access-based positioning or needs-based positioning. For example, needs-based is saying, look, we are going to serve these customers and not these other customers. Right? It doesn't mean we're going to turn them away, but we're going to focus on what does this type of customer need, and if we will offer whatever products that customer needs, and via whatever channels. Right? We might end up limiting our channels or our products because our customers don't need that. But we're going to focus on serving all of the needs of that particular type of customer. So, in other words, a variety-based positioning is one which is at its core about offering a limited set of products, saying we're going to limit the set of products. We're going to say no to this. We're going to offer these products, and then we'll serve whatever channels or customers are appropriate for that product choice. A needs-based positioning is about saying, we're going to serve all of the needs of this particular customer. Right? That may result in not offering all products. It may result in not using all channels. But the point is, we're doing that because we're trying to satisfy all the needs of a limited set of customers. Each one of these positions is based on saying about limiting. So a variety-based positioning is about offering a limited variety. And access-based positioning is about accessing customers through a limited number of channels or locations. A needs-based positioning is about limiting the customers or users that you serve. So, and again, straight out of the reading, this is a quote from the What is Strategy reading. Positioning can be based on producing a subset of an industry's product or services. I call this variety-based positioning. Right? If you offer a subset of an industry's product or services, that is a variety-based positioning. Key word here being subset. To offer only a limited set of product or services. If that's what you're all about, that's a variety-based positioning. So in other words, a variety-based positioning is about limiting the variety of product or services offered. So going back to this true or false question, a variety-based positioning is one in which a firm offers a broader variety of product or service than its rivals. That answer is false. No. A variety-based positioning is entirely focused on offering a limited variety. We only do these products. Others may do broader ones because they have whatever. We are choosing to focus and be the best at this limited set of products. That is a variety-based positioning. So I said I was doing this a little out of order. That was question 4. What about question 3 in positioning? Well, this one is a more complex question, and you'll understand now why I did it out of order, so I could say this. It said the following. A positioning based on producing a limited set of products, which we now know is a variety-based positioning, or serving a limited set of customers, which we now know is a needs-based positioning, makes economic sense and translates into a sustainable strategic position only when the best set of activities to produce those particular products or serve those particular customers differs from the best set of activities for producing or serving other product or customer types. Ugh, that's a mouthful, right? But what it's saying is, choosing to only serve certain customers, why would you ever choose to say, we're only going to do this product but not this other product? Or we're only going to do this customer, not the other customer, right? Saying, look, the only time you'd ever want to limit your customer scope or limit your product scope is when to expand it to do, the only reason you'd ever want to say, I'll do A but not B, is because doing B requires you to do something different. In other words, if you could win the marathon and the high jump without, doing anything different, your training is exactly the same, and you could be the best high jumper or the best marathon runner, then why wouldn't you do both? Right? But of course, that's not the case. The things that you're going to train to be a high jumper are different than things you're going to train, right, to be a marathon runner. But that's the saying, is that when does it make sense to limit the products or limit the customers you serve? When will that translate into sustainable strategic position? Is it when the activities actually differ for those different customers or different products? Well, later discussions, originally I was actually saved this for last, but I changed it around. But because later discussion, we're going to talk about activities and we're talking about trade-offs. Those are two of the last two sections we're going to go over here of the quiz. They actually add clarity for this question, but we don't really actually need to do that. Right? The most direct answer comes straight out of the concept reading. The answer to this is, just straight, almost word for word. I almost took this word for word out of the reading on what is strategy. So let's look at what is strategy. These are direct quotes from what is strategy about what we just said. In fact, the words like economic sense, I took them straight out of the reading. Variety-based positioning makes economic sense when a company can best produce particular products or services using distinctive sets of activities. Needs-based positioning arises when there are groups of customers with differing needs and when a tailored set of activities can serve those needs best. Differences in needs will not translate into meaningful positions unless the best set of activities to satisfy them also differs. If that were not the case, every competitor could meet those same needs and there would be nothing unique or valuable about the positioning. Right? In other words, the idea is these only, whether it's variety-based or needs-based, they only make economic sense when the activities to do that, right, are different for different, in this case of variety-based positioning, if you need different activities to optimally produce different products or services, then a variety-based positioning might make sense, and only will make sense in those conditions. And a needs-based positioning only makes sense when you'd want different activities to serve different customers. Otherwise, I'm going to serve customer A but not customer B. Well, why? Well, could you serve them equally well with the exact same activities? Well, then it doesn't make any sense to limit yourself to customer A. The only reason when you want to limit yourself, i.e. make a needs-based positioning to limit yourself to certain customers, or limit yourself to certain products, i.e. variety-based positioning, is when the activities that are optimal for those products or those customers are different than to serve other products or other customers. And to go on, Porter says this conclusion, quote, whatever the basis, variety, needs, access, or some combination of the three, positioning requires a tailored set of activities for that particular positioning. Because positioning is always a function of differences in the supply side, that is, of differences in activities. So going back to the question, a positioning based on producing a limited set of products or serving limited customers makes economic sense and translates into a sustainable strategic position only when the best set of activities to produce those particular products or serve the particular customers differs from the best set of activities for producing or serving other products or customer types. Yes, that's exactly the point. Exactly what Porter just said. True. Right? It doesn't make sense to limit yourself to particular products or particular customers unless you'd have to do different activities to serve a broader array of customers or produce a broader array of product services. And if that isn't 100% crystal clear, like I said, we're going to go over, when we go over the activities question and trade-offs questions, it's going to add a little more clarity, for this question. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about activities and activity systems. And again, this one, just because of the logic of it and the way it's going to work out in this presentation, I'm actually going to reverse the order here, the problematic questions were 1 and 4, but let me do 4 first and then I'll do 1. So question 4 under activity systems was the following. True or false? Performing similar activities better than rivals before them is a key to successful strategy. That's what strategy is about. Do the same thing better. All right, well, again, the emphasis here is going to be the similar activities. Is a successful strategy about performing similar activities better? Right? Well, let's just go through some of the slides that I did. These are just exact slides presented in class. Right? So we talked about activities and strategy here. How do activities support strategy? Well, all module concept ratings, right? We had, of course, creating competitive advantage. We had what is strategy. We had the perils about strategy. We had can you say what your strategy is. All module concept ratings emphasize the importance of activities and support of strategy. All agree on 2 key requirements. What were they? Right? Unique or distinct activities are necessary to produce advantage, and that a system of activities must exemplify fit, or alignment, or coherence, or consistency, or coordination. But in particular, for this question, the emphasis on part 1. You must have unique or distinct, not similar, unique or distinct activities to produce advantage. That is the key. How do activities support strategy? By being different, by doing different activities. And if we go to, again, this slide, which you've probably maybe seen more than any other in the course, where I define strategy, or Porter defines strategy rather. Strategy is the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. Right? So again, it's about being unique and doing a different set of activities. Right? So we highlight the words of particular significance. We're talking about activities, we're talking about unique, different. It's about distinction. Right? So strategy is about distinct activities, not similar activities. It's not about doing the same thing better. It's about doing different things. Right? So more specifically, here are some quotes from the reading on that. About, talking about this really gets to the difference between operational effectiveness and strategy. So operational effectiveness means performing similar activities. That's what the question. Remember, the question asks about similar activities. Performing similar activities better than rivals before them. That's operational effectiveness. In contrast, strategic positioning means performing different activities from rivals, or performing activities in different ways. So visually, remember this, right? Strategic positioning was about choosing a position along this productivity frontier, and the productivity frontier will come up, later under trade-offs, right? But remember, operational effectiveness, right, is about doing the same thing better. Achieving and extending best practice. What does best practice mean? Best practice means, who is the best at marketing? Who is the best at procurement? Who is the best at production? We should figure out who's doing the best thing and copy them. Do the same thing. Similar activities, right? And if we could figure out what they're doing, we would want to copy it. Right? And it's an opportunity. It's sort of, these are the no-brainers, right? Now they might be, no-brainers is a little bit too an inappropriate term because it suggests it doesn't require some great insight. It might require great insight, but once I figure it out, it's not a tough choice. I don't have to have a vote of the board. It's, I can make that choice. It's not a strategic choice, right? I'm not giving up anything by doing it. I figure, okay, that's what we got to do. Then you do it, right? You can strengthen both advantages at the same time. There's no trade-off. Right? It's not about, I see what they're doing, but if we did do what they're doing, we would lose in this area. Do we want to do that? No. I figured out what they're doing. I want to do that too. They're doing it better than me, so I want to do the same thing they're doing. Right? And it's ultimately, these are the right choices for all firms or organizations. Going on in the reading, what is strategy? He talked about, look, constant improvement in operational effectiveness is necessary to achieve superior profitability. However, it is not usually sufficient. Competitors can quickly imitate management techniques, new technologies, input improvements, and superior ways of meeting customer needs. So competition ultimately becomes a series of races down identical paths that no one can win. Right? That's operational effectiveness. We end up, the operational effectiveness is all about imitation, competitive convergence, right? But competition based on operational effectiveness is mutually destructive. It leads to wars of attrition. Now, to be clear, as he said before, it's necessary but not sufficient. Right? In fact, Porter said, look, operational effectiveness is arguably more important than strategy, right? Because I don't give a darn what your strategy is, right? If you're not efficient at what you're doing, you're not going to succeed. You can have a great strategy, but if you're not good at actually, the essentials, the things that everybody has to do, you're not going to succeed. Right? So, in other words, what we're saying is doing similar things better, which is operational effectiveness, is important, but it's not strategy. Right? Now, that said, people have blended the two, as the opening statement of the article says, operational effectiveness is not strategy. Gradually, managers have let operational effectiveness supplant strategy. But competitive strategy is about being different. It means deliberately choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of values. The essence of strategy is choosing to perform activities differently, or to perform different activities. Otherwise, strategy is nothing more than a marketing slogan that will not withstand competition. Right? You've got to actually do different things. And remember, again, just now that's sort of quoting from the reading. Let me show you some slides where we emphasize this, right? Remember this idea of the value chain. We talked about the ways of identifying activities. One way is to do the value chain. Another way we talked about activity system maps, right? But we emphasize with the value chain the whole idea that, look, yes, you're supposed to identify the activity in different areas. But remember that operational effectiveness is about activities that every organization should do. Right? And I sort of said, I don't even want to see those in your value chain. Those are, those aren't strategy. Strategy is about activities that only a particular organization can, will, or should do. So again, it's not about the similar activities that you do better, but the activities that are different. And remember all these slides about strategy, about competing to be unique. It's not about competing to be the best, right? It's not about running the same race faster. It's about running a different race. It's not about, being number one. It's about being successful on your own terms, right? It's not about, volume, more. It's about, it's okay to be a big fish in a small pond. Don't target everybody. Don't try to be everything to everyone, right? But offer tailored solutions to specific segments. Right? And here, competing to be the best is about operational effectiveness. Competing to be unique, that is what strategic positioning is. Right? And the mindset of competing to be the best is about imitation. Right? We end up with competitive convergence. Everybody's doing the same thing. But the mindset about competing to be unique, but the strategy mindset is about thinking differently. It's more innovation as opposed to imitation. Right? And ultimately, right, the idea here is that if everybody's trying to do similar things better, it's a zero-sum game. You win only if I lose, and vice versa. Right? But the idea is, if we're running different races, I can be great at what I'm doing. You can be great at what you do. Right? Everybody can gain. And so, remember, again, competitive strategy is about being different. Right? So going back to the question, true or false, performing similar activities better than rivals performing them is a key to successful strategy. Well, what does it mean to perform similar activities better than rivals? Performing similar activities better than rivals, that is about operational effectiveness. It is potentially a key to success, right? So it is a key, right, to success. Right? In fact, Porter said it might be more important, but it's not strategy. Right? It might be critically important, but it's not anything to do with strategy. Right? Strategy is about performing different activities than rivals. That's strategy or strategic positioning. Right? And so successful strategy, which this question is about being different, not about, it might be important in certain areas. Yeah, you got to perform similar activities better than rivals. That might be very important. But that is not the element of what you're doing. That is strategy. Strategy is about the part of what you're doing that is about doing different activities. So this is, of course, therefore false. That is not the key or a key to successful strategy. Right? That is, in fact, it might be a key to success, but it's not an element of strategy. All right, and so then that was question 4, activity system. I said I did them in different order. Now question 1, true or false, in order to maintain a sustainable strategic advantage, a firm must maintain flexibility and not tailor its activities to a particular strategic position. So let me actually talk about, I sort of bolded maintain flexibility and about tailor activities. I actually want to talk about these. Let me first talk about maintaining flexibility. So what's the relation? What is the story about maintaining flexibility? That sounds good. Being flexible is good, right? Isn't it? I think. Well, let's look at it, right? Remember, this is a slide. This slide actually, was not in the internal analysis module, but I'll show you from the internal analysis module. But this is one that highlighted this fundamental balancing act, the fundamental balancing act of strategy about flexibility versus commitment. Right? And in this was actually from the from the Kodak case study. We were talking about change, innovation, and change, right? Because flexibility can be good when you're talking about organizational change. Flexibility can facilitate organizational change. It's much easier. Gumby can do, is very flexible, can change, you tell me, you want to turn Gumby into the shape of a wheelbarrow, he can do it, right? He can make that change. But commitment is the key to competitive advantage, about saying, no, I'm not going to do certain things. I'm committing to one course of action, right? That is the key to competitive advantage. You've got to, flexibility. Nobody ever, there's some great examples of, this idea of nobody ever achieved great success by just being flexible the whole time. Ultimately, you've got to make the commitment and make the right commitment. Right? You've got to commit to a particular scope, a particular set of activities, a particular set of routines, etc. Right? But, of course, commitment reduces flexibility. Once you've made a commitment, you don't have the same options, right? Marriage is a commitment, but it reduces the flexibility, right? And again, a slinky, very flexible, right? But there's a trade-off here. And ultimately, understand, there's no such thing as commitment without inflexibility. They're antonyms, right, in some sense. So that is a fundamental trade-off in strategy. Right? But how does flexibility then relate to strategy? Well, understand, and we're going to go into more detail, but strategy is about commitment. It's not about flexibility, right? And even sort of Dilbert understands that. Here's a cartoon I didn't show you, right? But talking about this from Dilbert. Here's a guy giving a presentation. Our strategy is to detect any trends and react accordingly. To which Dilbert says, isn't that exactly the same as not having a strategy? Right? Which it is, right? Detect any trends and react accordingly. That is to not make any commitments, right? Well, hey, this slide didn't make itself. But it makes the point, right? Again, strategy is not about being flexible. It's about making a commitment, right? Now, the reason I didn't show you that cartoon is because there's a better one on the same thing from Dilbert, right? Where the boss comes in and says, our new strategy is to be nimble. Right? That's similar to flexible, right? Be nimble. Is that the same saying? Is that the same as saying our strategy is to have no strategy? Dilbert asks, right? Again, obviously he's been in this presentation before, right? To which the frustrated boss says, just do your job. Can I be nimble instead? Right? again, Scott Adams, Dilbert, understand strategy is the opposite of flexibility, right? So we're already getting this idea here. There's a problem here, right? In order to maintain a stable strategic advantage, a firm must maintain flexibility. Well, we're understanding there's a conflict between this. It's not saying to be, we could have discussions about what type of flexibility you should have or not, but understand that is not the key to stable strategic advantage. Flexibility, should have the hair on the back of your neck stand up when somebody is combining the word flexibility with strategy. Right? But what about the second part? Is it true that you should not tailor your activities to a particular strategic position? Right? Is that the key? Again, is that what you need to maintain a stable strategic advantage? Not tailor your activities. Well, look, here's what Porter says. These are just different quotes that I grabbed. I just searched for the word tailor in the reading What is Strategy. Here's some of the quotes. Here's some of the quotes I got. A firm stakes out a unique and valuable strategic position based on a tailored set of activities. Positioning requires a tailored set of activities because there's always a function of differences on the supply side. What turns a marketing concept into strategic position is the tailored set of activities that make it work. We've already seen some of these quotes before. Different positions require tailored activities, different product configuration, different equipment, different behavior, different skills, and different systems. A company's strategic position is contained in a set of tailored activities designed to deliver it. Right? Strategy is all about tailoring activities. You've got a sustainable strategic position requires tailored activities. And then I just went through my slides that I presented. These are some slides we presented in class. Just said, hey, which slides did I present that have the word tailored in it, right? Here we go. Again, strategy is about competing to be unique, right? In particular, you target specific segments. You offer a tailored solution to those segments. Here's a slide about internal analysis and activity system map, right? It's a tool for identification of key activities with the emphasis on distinct choices tailored to a specific strategic position. Right? Here we said, remember, strategic thinking is about systems thinking. Right? Where it's not about driven by key success factors, core competency, it's not determined by just a few parts of the overall whole, but instead advantage is actually driven by all distinct tailored activities. Right? But again, the emphasis on tailored activities. And here's a slide that I gave about trade-offs and strategy identifications. At this point, it was sort of review. I think we've highlighted a few measures which help characterize the organization's strategy. These things are about external position, but here, look, internal alignment is about unique tailored activities. So, again, the importance of tailoring activities is emphasized throughout the reading on what is strategy, but also throughout the course, throughout the module in the slides presented. So, no. True or false, in order to maintain a sustainable strategic advantage, a firm must maintain flexibility and not tailor its activity to a particular strategic position. That is false. Right? It's a very significantly, you should definitely make sure you understand why. Right? That is in fact false. All right, so that covers, activities and activity systems. Under the good strategy, bad strategy section, there was no, there's only 2 questions, and neither of those presented a difficulty. And there was one question on trade-offs. Question number 2, in that last section, that was problematic. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this question on trade-offs. And here was the question. True or false, the presence of trade-offs for cross-strategic positions within an industry means that ultimately only one strategic position will provide a sustainable advantage. And this is pretty fundamental. I was kind of surprised people got this one wrong, or a fair number of people got that wrong. And so I'm going to show you some slides that we did go over in class, and I'll give you some quotes from the reading on this. So you'll see that, yes, we did, the answer to this question was emphasized during class. But just to drive the point home, I've actually created a few new slides actually here. I already showed you a few new slides there, but here I've created several new slides that I'm going to incorporate in the future. Right? Because this is something that's very fundamental. I'm kind of surprised. Like I said, teachers don't always know. When you know a subject very, very well, and something that seems readily apparent and obvious to you, you don't always understand what might be complex in the student's mind. And so, frankly, when students answer questions like this wrong, it actually helps me to become a better teacher. Right? But that said, that's not, as I said, that's not an excuse for getting the question wrong. Just because I could have presented it better, because it was pretty clear, right? But I'll show you. So again, here's the question. True or false? The presence of trade-offs across strategic positions within an industry means that ultimately only one strategic position will provide a sustainable advantage. So there's only one optimal strategic position. Only one firm can succeed. Right? We can't have Coke and Pepsi. We can only have Coke or Pepsi. Right? They can't both do well. That's sort of what we're saying. Well, let's just go back to this, right? But what's the relationship between, the viability of different strategic positions, and trade-offs? Well, first, we actually, although we've hinted at it, we haven't defined trade-offs yet in this presentation. So here's the slide. Remember, I gave you this slide. I think the strategy about trade-offs and focus. So this is a slide I gave you on what trade-offs are. So trade-offs are about incompatibility, conflict, or mismatch, right? It could be across strategic positions, right? In other words, there's the balance of advantages. There could be trade-off across different balances of those advantages, between scope choices, among activity choices. So why? What are the sources of trade-offs? Well, it could be because there's an incompatibility or product or service features or attributes. It's simply, you're not going to satisfy different customers with the same product, right? The McDonald's hamburger is not going to satisfy a locavore vegetarian. There's going to be conflict there. There could be inconsistencies in image or reputation, right? Ferrari, they would undermine their reputation if they offered minivans, and people wouldn't want to buy a minivan necessarily from Ferrari, right? There could be differences in the optimal configuration of activities, right? Edward Jones is this very much focused on the individual investor and conservative investments, etc. They're not optimally configured to serve the hedge fund day trader types, right? Limits on internal coordination, motivation, and control. You just try to do too many things, right? You can do none of them well. As opposed to diversified conglomerate offering that very tailored service, as opposed to a firm that is focused specifically on offering that tailored niche service. These are different. These are what it means to have trade-offs across positions, scope choices, or activities. Well, so here's one idea. Let's think about, remember, strategic position we talked about is primarily, we think about choice of scope and also about balance of advantages. Well, think about strategic position in terms of choice of scope. Remember, we're answering the question that we're addressing is this idea of trade-offs across positions and what they mean for whether or not it's true that because of trade-offs, there's only one sustainable strategic position. Well, let's think about this idea of trade-offs and positions. So first, in terms of choice of scope. So we talked about, I'm ignoring channels or locations. Just let's focus on what are the two most common definitions of scope, where product or services and customers or users are served. Well, how do trade-offs come into play? So with trade-offs across positions, right, it means that strength in one area comes at the expense of weakness in other areas. That's what a trade-off is, right? So you can't optimally provide all product or services to all customers, because if you're really good at doing one product, you're not going to be as good at another one. If you're really good at serving one particular customer, you're not going to be as good at serving others, right? That's what it means to have a trade-off. Right? So you've got to, this business comes along, it's going to say, you know what, we can't optimally provide all products, so we're just going to provide those products. And we can't optimally serve all customers, right? So we're going to serve those customers, right? Again, we're not going to turn away other customers, but we're not going to design our operations for those for different customers. These are the customers we target. These are the product or services we provide. So you got to choose, because of trade-offs, you've got to choose what not to do, right? And so the organization will optimally make distinct choices tailored to that position. Right? So another firm, business B, comes along. They're going to choose to provide different product or services, and serve maybe different customers. Right? And neither firm A, business A, or B, they both could be right and both could be successful. Right? But the idea is for business A to provide those products, they cannot provide, to provide apples, oranges, and bananas, for example. They cannot also be really good at doing strawberries and pears. Right? Or to serve, the first two customers on our list, they can't be so good at serving the other customer types. Right? And business B, vice versa. Right? They've chosen certain products and position themselves to certain products, certain customers. They could not optimally serve, the same customers and the same products that business A is doing. So trade-offs actually, in this example, support multiple potentially successful positions. Without trade-offs, suppose there was no trade-offs, right? Then strength in one area would not create weakness in another area. So you could be strong at everything. Right? You could be a great marathon runner, great high jumper, and president of the United States, and a richest man in the world. You could do everything. You could strengthen in one area does not create weakness in other areas. So in this sense, you could optimally provide all product or services to all customers. Right? So if business A would say, we're leaving money on the table. Why not do all? There's the activities that we need to provide apples are exactly the same as everything else. We can optimally do the same thing and optimally provide all products and optimally serve all customers. We don't have to choose. Right? There's no need to choose what not to do because there's no trade-off. By serving one customer, by optimally serving customer A, you are not weaker at serving customer B. By optimally providing product A, you're not weaker providing product B. There's no trade-offs across products or across customers. Therefore, you can do it all. Okay? But so by the same logic, though, all organizations will optimally make the same choices because given the same positions. So business B would do the same thing. Right? So without trade-offs, business A and business B are going to look exactly the same. With trade-offs, they could have different sustainable strategic positions. But without trade-offs, they might as well, and they do the exact same thing. So that's the idea of how trade-offs come into play with choice of scope. Well, remember the other way we looked at strategic position was in terms of balance of advantages. Remember these diagrams here, right? Let's go back to just the classic from Porter. We have degree of differentiation, which is willingness to pay on the vertical axis, and relative cost on the horizontal axis, right? And we said, look, there's some productivity frontier. There's some trade-off between differentiation and cost, right? There's some inherent trade-off. Right? You cannot, you may for a while be able to sort of improve your willingness to pay and lower your costs, but there comes a point at which you cannot have people willing to pay more without incurring at least a little bit higher cost. And you cannot reduce costs without reducing willingness to pay by a little bit. That's what the frontier tells you. Right? And strategic positioning, therefore, was about choosing a unique point along that frontier. But what if there were no trade-offs? So without trade-offs across advantages, suppose there were no trade-offs across advantages. Without trade-offs across advantages, right? What does that mean? Well, improvement in one advantage would not compromise the other advantage. Right? You could get better at one without getting worse at the other. You could raise your willingness to pay and lower your costs at the same time, right? And so no trade-offs mean there's no need to choose a balance. You don't need to choose how you balance it because there's no trade-off. Right? Getting better in one area is not, you're not sacrificing anything. So strategic positioning about choosing a balance, that goes away. But also, you can always improve in both dimensions. If there's no trade-offs at any point, right, then you can always improve in both dimensions, which means there is no productivity frontier, right? You don't get to a point where you got to choose whether to get better at one or the other. You can get better at both. So without trade-off, there'd be no productivity frontier. And so competition is simply a race to the upper right, right? Let's raise willingness to pay and lower costs. Let's keep going. Who can do it, right? And you're going to find some best practice, and I'm going to try to. And we're basically what's happening here. Business A, business B, both are trying to do both, and they might discover different ways of doing it, right? Different, and this is again operational effective, different best practices. And I'm going to try to imitate you, try to imitate me. But if I know what you're doing, I'm going to want, and you're doing something. If you have a best practice, I'm going to want to do it. If I have best practice, you're going to want to do it, right? But we're not having to choose to balance. There's no trade-offs. So we're both chasing the same position. So again, notice that it's without trade-offs, right? There is one position. We're both seeking the same position. Now with trade-offs across advantages, the productivity frontier defines the point at which there's a trade-off, right? That's what the productivity frontier is. So with trade-off, it means we have a frontier, right? Maybe you could improve, both for a ways, but there comes a point where improving in one dimension means you're going to get weaker in the other. That's what the frontier tells you, which means once you hit that frontier, you got to choose how to balance advantage. So now you've got to choose strategic positioning. Choose a unique point along the frontier. Right? Got to choose where you want to be. But again, there's no right or wrong per se. Well, there's probably wrong. There's probably bad choices. But the point is, they're not no-brainers. I'm choosing to give up a little bit of this in favor of a little bit of this, and you're choosing the opposite, right? Organizations will choose different positions with different balances across advantages, right? Remember this example I gave you about strategic positioning of department stores, right? We talked about Nordstrom being highly differentiated but also high cost, or Walmart being low cost but relatively low differentiation, right? And we said the following. This is a slide, precisely from before. I said, look, it's always ideal to be somewhere along the productivity frontier, right? But there's usually not only one solitary optimal position on the frontier. There may be multiple positions which can sustain superior performance. And the optimal positioning may vary by organization situation. What's best for you may not be, but best for me. The point being that it is because of trade-offs. Without trade-offs, we would be pursuing the same position. It is only because of trade-offs that there are potentially multiple sustainable positions. So here's another slide. Remember this slide on internal alignment. I said, look, trade-offs and activities mean there is no one best way to perform functions. Without trade-offs, all organizations should perform activities the same way, right? We should all do the same thing. There's no trade-offs, right? But without trade-offs, the competition is about operational effectiveness, not strategy. But trade-offs mean there is no one best position, no one best way, no one best set of activities, no one best scope choice, right? With trade-offs, optimal activity choice in one area depends on the other choices. Right? So the idea is, again, trade-offs don't mean that there's only one optimal position or only one scope choice, only one optimal balance advantages, or only one optimal activityism. It's actually the opposite. That without trade-offs, that would all be true. But with trade-offs is the reason there are multiple, potentially multiple sustainable positions, multiple scope choices that can yield advantage, right? And this all goes back to, remember, strategy is about competing to be unique. It's not about all pursuing the same one position. It's about being different. Right? Remember, about competing to be unique. Right? And this is a slide I gave you sort of summarizing those earlier slides, right? But let me underline some important things here about competing to be unique. It's about running a different race, where there's more than one winner, not just one optimal position. It's about targeting specific segments, not targeting all segments. It's about a positive sum game which all parties can gain. There's not just one winner. So going back to this question, the presence of trade-offs across strategic positions within an industry means that ultimately only one strategic position will provide a sustainable advantage, right? No, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. It's because of trade-offs that this is not true. If there were no trade-offs, yeah, there would be only one strategic position which provides sustainable advantage. In fact, strategy would be meaningless. Right? But it's because of trade-offs that we can have multiple strategic positions that can provide sustainable advantage. Right? It is not, the idea of only one strategic position. This is actually, like I say, directly contradicts this whole idea of trade-offs. Right? And so this statement, in fact, is false. And it's important that you understand. This is, again, because it's very fundamental. It's why I created some new slides. It's very fundamental to understand. So that's it. Those are the 10 questions on which there were problems. Like I said, the overall score on the quiz was quite high. It was typical, but it was interesting. And this took me longer to prepare this, and it obviously took me longer to present this because I don't think it had been more than like 5 problem questions before. But I hope this presentation has been helpful. And like I said, it covers some things that were not covered in any of. It covers some things that I think would be helpful to somebody who got 100. Maybe on the quiz, right? But because it really helped me think more fundamentally. Okay, well, why are students getting these questions wrong? And so I hope it is helpful, not just for your understanding of how you did in the quiz, but also for your understanding of strategy in general. All right. Thank you very much.